All right, here we go. We're at Corliss Brothers in Ipswich with garden author Deb Lambert. Morning, Deb.
Good morning, Rick.
All right, what are our plants of the week? Looks like we got a huge display here.
We have a nice selection of shade-loving plants, either shade-tolerant or shade-loving, and there is a distinction. Some plants prefer sort of a partial shade, some prefer a little bit deeper shade. So what we'll be showing you today will take a variety of situations, and let's get into the different leaf textures. Some are blooming, many have a bit of a flower at some point, but mostly we're looking at plants that are going to offer interest through texture, through foliage. And let's take a look at this first cut that we have set up over here. And this first plant that we're looking at in the background is one of the taller growing astilbes. This is a plant that in the ground will eventually get up to 3 feet. It's great for shade. It's called an ostrich. The variety is ostrich astilbe, and it's one of, as I say, one of the larger ones. It's in bud right now, not in flower just yet. And as we all know, there are many different varieties of astilbe. Some are very low. There are whites, pinks, reds, purplish colors, lavenders. They're a wonderful group of plants that give you lots of color. And then next in the front here, we're looking at a variety of columbine that's actually a native species of ours, with these neat little red and orange flowers. This is a variety called canadensis. Very pretty foliage all during the season, but it blooms nicely in the spring. It likes woodland settings, so you can guess that it would actually accept some shade with not a problem at all. I think when we think of shade, we primarily think about hostas. And hostas can be an obsession if you're a collector of hostas, and I know folks that have entire gardens devoted to hosta, and just with hosta alone you can create an awful lot of interest. We see all kinds of variegations, we see blues, we see white edging, all sorts of cream edging in this case, with a little bit of a greenish tint to it. A very pretty plant. When we look at this hosta over here, we're looking at more subtle differences in the coloration, and there is just the littlest bit of dark streaking in there. So it's one that is best seen close up to appreciate it. Now, when we're talking about shade, you have to consider ferns as one of the mainstays of or the staples of a shade garden. And most of the ferns that we have here are going to love shade. They'll take anywhere from deep to light shade, depending on variety. We're looking at one of the painted ferns in the front here. Very nice. And they are. This is a variety called Ghost. It has that kind of silvery cast to it. There are several varieties of Japanese painted ferns. Some are very, very silver. Some have a red or a pink flush to them. Very, very pretty on their own. Then we are also looking at a hybrid variety of a lady fern, which has these neat little ends on it that just kind of flare out and has that nice open lacy look. So it's a very delicate texture in the garden. And you can see if you juxtapose the lightness and the frilliness of a fern like that with the really substantial growth of the hosta, you get a great contrast, lots of interest. And when we're going over in the front here, we're actually looking at brunaria, and this does have a sweet little blue flower in the spring, and it's a really handsome texture. It's a pretty cream variegation, and that can take a light shade as well. In the front, we're looking at some pink Nancy lamium, and lamium is a wonderful ground cover. I've grown it in the past, several different varieties. There's one called White Nancy with a white flower as well. They're very easy to grow in a shady spot, and they'll take fairly good shade. They're very versatile, and they have these wonderful little pink flowers that are just about to start blooming, and they last for quite some time. So you're getting a couple of seasons of interest in that, with right through the season with the foliage, and then for probably close to a month you get the blooms on there. Now there's another plant, don't grow on everybody, it's called ajuga, and some people are fighting the wild ajuga that grows around in the lawns, but to me there's nothing more handsome than the bronzy foliage, and it's kind of a crinkly bronzy foliage. And this is one of the newer hybrids called Blue Muffin, but it's pretty. It blooms, as you would guess, with a blue flower, and the blue flower stays in place for quite some time. I have several varieties of ajuga. Yes, you want to keep an eye on them and keep them constrained a little bit. They want to wander around, but generally what I've found is the variegated versions and the burgundy are not as aggressive as the green, and they're very well mannered in the landscape. So again, a nice front of the border plant or a nice ground cover as well. As we're just coming down here, a reminder that as we look down here at some of the annual specimens like caladium that love shade, comes in pink and white and variegated, spotted, all sorts of different varieties. That is a nice way to bring in a touch of a little color. Leave a few spaces in that shade garden. Leave room for maybe a begonia that has a rich red color, an orange color. maybe something in a peach in the begonia with the big ruffled edges. So if you're really looking for a spot of color, leave a little room, or maybe set several pots of annuals around, space them around through the planting. You can make it really interesting. In the front here, another reminder is impatience and how well that does in the shade. Again, another annual, but to kind of perk up the whole planting if you want to get away from so much of the greens and the variegateds, and pop a few impatiens in, maybe around the border, brighten it right up in a shady spot. Over here we're looking at pachysandra, which most folks are familiar with as an evergreen ground cover, and that will do almost equally as well in sun and shade. Very, very aggressive, so watch it, keep it in bounds, but it is nice ground cover, perhaps for bordering around trees and places that are difficult to grow shade perennials otherwise. English ivy down here in the front, which has a wonderful evergreen foliage. We're also looking at vinca, another evergreen, great for the shade, has blue flowers in the spring. It's a native around here as well. There's another one of the little pink Nancy, this one is actually a red Nancy, and it's a little deeper pink than that other one we looked at in the lamiums, but that's a nice little border plant of ground cover. Now this, although it looks small right now, is going to actually get to about 5 feet, and it's bugbane, which is Semicifusia, nice ferny foliage, and something that color accent is just really special in a shade garden, to get that really nice burgundy color in there. In the front we're looking at another of the ajugas, and this is one with just a really deep green with just a touch of bronze. Also a really pretty one. And I'm sorry, I think I said blueberry muffin on the other one. This one actually is. And you can see the denseness. It's just a shorter foliage. It's a more dense, compact variety, again with a beautiful blue flower to it. So that's nice for the smaller garden too. Up on the front here we have some variegated ivy. That will take a partial shade. If it gets too shady, it won't have as good a variegation to it, so a light shade would be alright on that. Potentilla is another one that's a nice little ground cover, or it can take a partial shade and be used as a border plant. Now when we talk about hosta, I think most of us are thinking of these large-leaved hostas, perhaps, but there are hostas that are a mid-range, that are going to be more of a moderate size, that might get no taller than a foot or so, with a narrow or smaller leaf, with variegation, without variegation, and this one is the smallest that we have to date. It's called Blue Mosiers. And this is only going to be about 6 inches at maturity. So certainly there is a hosta for every garden out there. If you've got a tiny garden or you just want to border a larger bed, they are very nice for doing that. Houtunia is one you might not be familiar with, but it is called chameleon plant as well. Can be aggressive. I would suggest putting some edging around it, but boy, talk about an accent in the shade. And I have grown it in sun and shade, and it will survive in both, but mine did actually do a lot better with a fair amount of shade, and it kept a good color on it too, which is nice. So you get that little red flush on it, which is really handsome. And back here we have rose barlow, which is another columbine, can accept a partial shade and do quite well. And if you want a different texture, then we look at grasses, and the sedge grasses, many of them can accept some shade or some partial shade, and this is one of the taller ones. This is called a palm sedge, and this will give you some height. You can see it's heading up already. And folks are really into the ornamental grasses these days. They're graceful, they lend a lot of substance and interest in the garden, and so there are grasses for the shady areas as well. Another one I didn't think to bring over is northern sea oats. Beautiful plant with little dangling seed heads. Great plant in any landscape, sun or shade, very hardy. Over in the back we have a cinnamon fern, and this cinnamon fern gets its name from its little spores that are born on the spikes up here, and they have the rich cinnamon color. It's a beautiful little plant, and that's kind of more of a medium texture. Again, when seen in with the hosta, a nice contrast. But I think that kind of shows you, including these little lemony yellow accents, the white accents, all the different sizes and types of plants that will do well in a shade garden. There are many more that I didn't happen to bring over here, lobelia and with a red flower and a burgundy foliage. There's so many beautiful plants that we can think of. And last week, as I wrote about them, I just thought, this week, why not actually show a few of them and give folks the idea. And it's all about texture, it's all about leaf color, and it's all about having a great shade garden where you can relax and cool down on a hot summer day.
All right, there we go. The Plants of the Week with garden author Deb Lambert. With more stuff online, I'm Rick Moore.